The sun was setting over the ragged border town, painting the wooden buildings and dust-filled streets in the colors of fire and gold. The auctioneer's voice carried over the restless crowd, sharp and eager, calling out the final bids of the day. The women lined up on the crude platform looked pale and weary, each one sold off to strangers who wanted a wife, a cook, or simply someone to ease their loneliness. When the line had nearly emptied, one woman remained. Her figure was slight but proud, her hands clasped tightly together as though she could hold herself from crumbling. She was the last bride left at the border town auction. The crowd began to thin, men turning away with shrugs and mutters. Some had already chosen, others said she looked too thin, too used up, too quiet for their liking. She stood alone, with dust clinging to her hem and strands of dark hair falling loose around her face. The auctioneer barked once more, his voice gruff with irritation. "Last one, gentlemen. Don't let her stand there all night." But silence fell heavy, broken only by the restless shifting of boots and horses tied along the posts. Then, from the shadows of the crowd, a man raised his hand. His movement was slow, deliberate, as though even the act of lifting his arm cost him something. The people turned to see him. A cowboy, broad-shouldered once, but now stooped as if the weight of sorrow bent him low. His coat was dusty, his hat pulled down to hide most of his face, but nothing could hide the haunted look in his eyes. Rumors had long followed him in these parts, that he had lost his wife in childbirth, that he carried scars not only on his body but in his soul. Folks called him broken, said he had no business starting again. Yet here he stood, hand raised, bidding not with eagerness but with a kind of desperate resolve. The auctioneer, surprised, dropped the gavel quickly, glad to be done. Sold. The woman was handed off to him as though she were just another transaction, another body to pass along. She stumbled slightly when she stepped down from the platform, but the cowboy caught her with a steady hand. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if he feared she might shatter like glass. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. She saw the weariness in his face, the deep lines etched by loss, and something else too, an echo of her own emptiness. He saw in her eyes not just fear but a spark of endurance, a quiet strength that had kept her standing when others would have fallen. He cleared his throat. "Name's Eli." His voice was rough, like gravel, yet there was a gentleness buried in it. "Clara," she whispered, clutching the small bundle of belongings she carried, little more than a shawl and a worn Bible. The ride to his ranch was long and silent, the moon rising above the desert plain as the wind tugged at their clothes. Eli didn't push her to speak. He simply rode beside her, his presence steady, like a wall against the emptiness of the night. When they reached the ranch, she saw a place as weary as its master. The fences leaned, the barn doors sagged, and the house stood alone against the wide stretch of land, weather-beaten but still standing. Inside, the rooms were clean but bare, filled with shadows. He set a lamp on the table and gestured to the chair. "Rest. You'll be safe here." She sat, her hands folded in her lap, unsure whether to believe him. Safe was a word she hadn't known in years. Days turned to weeks, and silence slowly gave way to words. Clara rose early, mended clothes, tended the small garden behind the house. She had been sold as a bride, but Eli never treated her like property. He gave her space, never touched her without asking, never demanded what she wasn't ready to give. At night, he would sit on the porch with his hat in his hands, staring out into the distance as though talking to ghosts. One evening, Clara stepped outside, drawn by the loneliness in his figure. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stood beside him. "Why did you choose me?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he let out a slow breath. "Because you looked like me. Everyone else saw someone not worth the trouble. But I saw someone who'd lost too much, and kept standing anyway." Her eyes stung with unshed tears. No one had ever named her strength before. She had been called weak, unwanted, a burden, but never strong. In that moment, something shifted between them. The land was unforgiving, but together they worked it. She learned to ride the horses he kept, though her hands blistered from the reins. He showed her how to mend fences, how to read the sky for storms. At the same time, she brought warmth into the house again. She sewed curtains for the windows, baked bread that filled the air with comfort, even planted wildflowers near the porch. Little by little, the broken ranch began to breathe again. Eli carried scars that went deeper than his skin. Some nights he woke with a start, sweat on his brow, calling out for the wife he had buried. Clara never pressed him, but when he was ready, he told her. He spoke of the child that never drew breath, of the grave behind the house where the grass grew thicker, greener, as if it drank her memory. Clara listened, her hand resting over his, her silence a balm. She knew grief well, having lost her family to fever and been sold when no one claimed her. Their wounds met like rivers, flowing into one another, not erasing but easing. One stormy night, when thunder rolled and the roof shook, Clara's fear returned. The sound reminded her of nights when men had shouted and doors had been broken down. She trembled in the corner of the room, unable to breathe. Eli found her there, crouched like a child. He knelt slowly, careful not to startle her, and spoke in the gentlest tone. "You're safe, Clara. I'll never let anyone hurt you again." The words broke something inside her, and she sobbed into his chest, the storm outside nothing compared to the storm that finally left her heart. From then on, trust grew stronger. Their bond was not forged in haste but in patience, like iron tempered in fire. Love came quietly, not in grand gestures but in the way he fixed her chair when it splintered, in the way she pressed an extra biscuit onto his plate when he thought she wasn't looking. The town still whispered about Eli, the broken cowboy who bought the last bride. But when they saw Clara by his side, her back straight, her smile returning, they began to see something different. They saw a man who, though scarred, had chosen to protect instead of destroy. They saw a woman who, though discarded, had become the heart of a home. Seasons turned. The ranch thrived once more, calves filling the pastures, crops taking root in the stubborn soil. Clara often stood at the grave of Eli's first wife, laying flowers she had grown herself. She spoke to the stone with honesty and respect. "I'll take care of him, the way you would have wanted." Eli never asked her to, but when he saw her there, his eyes softened with gratitude. Years later, people no longer remembered the auction as clearly. What they remembered was the couple who rebuilt a life from ruin. The cowboy who raised his hand when no one else would. The bride who was chosen not for beauty or wealth but for her unbroken spirit. And on quiet evenings, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in gold once more, Eli would sit beside Clara on the porch. He would take her hand, rough and calloused from work yet gentle in his grip, and whisper, "You saved me, Clara." She would smile, her voice steady. "No, Eli, we saved each other." And in that simple truth lay the heart of their story, two broken souls who, against all odds, found freedom, love, and a home in one another.